the world is just, well, it's a whirlwind of events, isn't it? Headlines flash by, each one demanding your attention. But really understanding what's going on often comes from connecting those seemingly separate dots, seeing the deeper currents at play.
Indeed. It's a constant torrent of information, really. What's truly fascinating, I think, is how many of these individual threads actually weave into these larger tapestries of global trends. And that's precisely what we aim to illuminate for you today, exploring not just, what's happening, but maybe why it matters and what the broader implications might be for our, interconnected world.
Exactly. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today, as always, is to cut through that information overload. We've taken a curated stack of sources, articles, research, your notes, all fresh from today, July 5th, 2025. And we're going to try and distill the most crucial and hopefully fascinating insights, sort of a shortcut to being truly well-informed. You've given us a really captivating mix today. It ranges from, major geopolitical shifts and significant economic announcements right down to heartbreaking natural disasters, a peek into the future of healthcare, and even a few moments of pure human spectacle.
A real mix.
A real mix. We'll be navigating through diverse perspectives, trying to see things from different angles, left, right, ensuring we understand the different takes on these crucial global developments. So let's unpack this, because what we've got today is truly a kaleidoscope of global happenings, from the very, very serious, unfolding conflicts and natural catastrophes to the surprisingly competitive and maybe even a bit controversial.
Yeah. Okay, let's kick things off with what seems like a rapidly heating new cold front, the Arctic. The United States is embarking on a massive, really significant $25 billion investment.
Huge number.
Yeah, in its Arctic military and logistical capabilities. This funding, it's part of President Donald Trump's new budget bill, which Congress just approved. And it's actually the largest investment in U.S. Coast Guard history.
Ever.
Yeah.
We're talking specific funds earmarked for building 16 new icebreaker vessels and 10 light and medium icebreaking cutters. And the plan is to get all that done by 2029.
This investment is quite telling, I think, especially when you look at the current strategic disparity there. The United States currently operates, only 2 functional polar-class icebreakers. Just 2.
2, right.
Now, compare that to Russia. They maintain a commanding lead with a fleet of over 50 ice-capable vessels. And that includes nuclear-powered ones.
50.
So beyond just the raw numbers, this isn't simply a naval arms race. It feels more like a fundamental remapping of future global trade routes and, crucially, resource access. This disparity, it has profound strategic implications for asserting influence and, protecting economic interests in a region that's becoming more and more accessible every year.
That is a huge gap to close. And it's a clear signal of strategic intent from the U.S., isn't it? Vice President J.D. Vance has really been emphasizing the need for U.S. leadership up there in the Arctic, noting the growing presence of both Russia and China.
Right. Both are factors.
And it's not just about naval presence either. We even saw President Trump reignite interest in potentially acquiring Greenland.
Yeah.
That massive autonomous territory that's part of the Kingdom of Denmark, sitting right there between the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans.
Mm-hmm.
And he even quite controversially suggested that force could be an option for this acquisition.
Which caused quite a stir.
Oh, absolutely. And on the other side, you have Russian President Vladimir Putin, who's been consistently underscoring the Arctic's strategic importance, warning about, escalating geopolitical tensions in the region.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's pretty clear why this area is becoming such a flashpoint. The melting ice. That's a direct consequence of climate change. Mm-hmm. It's opening up new shipping routes that just weren't previously accessible.
Right.
These routes could dramatically cut transit times between continents. And at the same time, it's providing access to vast, previously unreachable energy resources. We're talking oil, natural gas, even rare earth elements, potentially. So this naturally accelerates what you might call a global competition over the Arctic, especially among NATO countries, because most of them actually have territorial claims in the region.
So this really raises an important question then.
Yeah.
What does this whole transformation mean for international relations, resource control, and maybe even the very nature of sovereignty in the extreme north in the coming decades? It feels like uncharted territory, literally and figuratively.
Absolutely. The old rules might not apply anymore.
Okay, so from the cold, strategic waters of the Arctic, let's transition now to the active conflicts and that complex diplomatic dance playing out elsewhere, specifically concerning Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, the conflict in Ukraine, it continues to evolve with honestly alarming intensity. We're seeing a really significant escalation on the ground. Ukraine has been targeted in what's being called a major attack. Russia launched extensive drone and missile strikes on Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine.
And the UN Secretary General strongly condemned these, called them the largest barrages in over 3 years of war.
3 years? Yeah. And critically, they disrupted the power supply to the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which, again, just underlines the ongoing terrible risks to nuclear safety in an active conflict zone.
That's always the nightmare scenario there.
Always. And in parallel, you have Russia's defense ministry reporting that they downed over 100 Ukrainian drones. This was between Friday night and Saturday morning, mostly over its own territory.
Inside Russia.
Yeah. Inside Russia. Primarily in western regions like Voronezh, Bryansk, Belgorod, Saratov, and Novgorod. And 2 of those drones were apparently even targeting Moscow, the capital.
Oh.
Now, casualties were apparently largely avoided in those specific strikes inside Russia, but industrial sites were reportedly hit in the Chuvash Republic, that's a republic in western Russia, and residential buildings got damaged in cities like Engels and Saratov, also in western Russia.
And Ukraine's top general is even warning about a possible new Russian offensive in the northeast. So it just feels like a significant and concerning escalation of the conflict, right? It's extending beyond the immediate front lines, going deeper into both territories now.
It really does seem that way.
And what's particularly interesting here maybe is the backdrop to these escalating attacks.
Right.
They came after those recent phone calls between President Putin and President Trump.
Right. That timing is notable.
Yeah, Trump had previously said that Putin won't stop his actions, which kind of suggested a certain fatalism, maybe. But then later he described Putin as a professional, someone capable of enduring sanctions. And then he also stated that Ukraine will need Patriot missiles for its defense, and quite directly chided Putin for his actions. It's a very mixed bag of signals coming from the U.S., wouldn't you say?
It is. Very complex messaging. And this leads us right into the complex diplomatic maneuvers and these shifting alliances that are playing out. French President Emmanuel Macron, for instance. He held his first phone conversation in nearly 3 years with President Putin.
First one in a long time.
A long time. Now, the primary focus was reportedly nuclear non-proliferation, especially amid those heightened tensions in the Middle East. But the conversation also touched on Ukraine. Macron apparently expressed disappointment over the lack of progress there and endorsed continued Western sanctions as, leverage.
Okay.
The Kremlin, for its part, just reiterated its long-standing position that the conflict's roots lie in, quote, Western disregard for Russian security concerns, and insisted that any resolution must address new territorial realities, which essentially means accepting its territorial annexations.
Right, that's the sticking point, always has been. So what does this all mean for that united Western front we've heard so much about? Is this Macron call a crack, maybe? Or is it just a strategic shift in diplomatic pressure? It certainly reflects what some are calling his recent shift towards broader regional dialogue, potentially including Russia.
It's a complex calculation, no doubt. Well, you could see it as an attempt to open new channels, maybe for de-escalation. Moscow's unwavering insistence on those new territorial realities remains, a significant hurdle. A huge one, really, to any genuine diplomatic breakthrough.
Seems insurmountable right now.
It really signals that Russia views these territorial changes as completely non-negotiable. Now, speaking of new alliances and recognitions, this is interesting. Russia has also officially recognized the Taliban government in Afghanistan. That's the landlocked country in Central and South Asia.
Right, I saw that. First major power to do so.
Exactly, first major global power. The Russian presidential envoy, Zamir Kabulov, he cited growing economic collaboration and the Taliban's efforts to combat terrorism and drug trafficking. He even characterized their evolution from a global jihad stance to a more nationally focused administration.
That is a significant framing.
It is, and this move could significantly alter the international perception, maybe even the legitimacy of the Taliban regime going forward.
Meanwhile, closer to Russia, within the EU itself, there's been some internal drama playing out over sanctions, right? Slovakia, that's the landlocked country in Central Europe, has once again blocked the European Union's 18th round of sanctions against Russia.
Still holding out.
Yeah. They're setting serious economic concerns over the EU's Repower EU plan, which aims to phase out Russian energy imports by 2028. Slovakia, and also Hungary, another landlocked country there in Central Europe, They argue that this plan threatens their national energy security and could lead to, well, substantial price increases for their people.
And huge penalties, potentially.
Exactly. Potential penalties of up to $20 billion for breaking long-term contracts they have with Russia's state-owned gas company, Gazprom. So this decision, it needs unanimous approval from all 27 EU member states, and that's proving to be a real challenge.
It really highlights the deep economic complexities, doesn't it? And the internal divisions within the EU regarding their stance on Russia. While some nations clearly prioritize a unified geopolitical front, others are weighing these direct and, frankly, substantial economic impacts on their own citizens.
That's a tough balancing act.
It really is. And partly in response to these kinds of rising geopolitical tensions and, perceived threats from Russia, the EU is also preparing a new strategy to build up an emergency stockpile of critical supplies.
Oh, interesting. What kind of supplies?
We're talking essentials like food, medicines, rare earth elements, which are crucial for tech and even nuclear fuel. The idea is to coordinate backup inventories across member states and also encourage private sector participation to, bolster Europe's overall strategic resilience.
Makes sense, given the current climate.
Okay,
so from these macroeconomic and diplomatic shifts, let's zoom in on something that always impacts funding and international trust. Corruption. There are reports that Ukrainian anti-corruption authorities raided the home of the former defense minister, Alexei Reznikov.
Yes. Seizing an undeclared smartphone and documents, apparently?
And this is tied to a major embezzlement case involving military food procurement. We're talking over 733 million hryvnias, which is about 17.6 million US dollars allegedly misappropriated, and another $18.9 million allegedly targeted by the same scheme.
And this follows, previous scandals during Reznikov's tenure. There were allegations about inflated prices for military jackets, fraudulent food purchasing contracts, things that ultimately led to his resignation.
Right, he had to step down over those.
Exactly. And his successor is also reportedly under investigation for similar issues. Now, this pattern of corruption, it has significant financial implications, especially when you think about re-encryption efforts down the line.
Absolutely.
Take BlackRock, for example, the major global investment management corporation. They've actually abandoned their efforts to raise a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. It was called the Ukraine Development Fund, projected to mobilize maybe up to $15 billion for Ukraine's post-war reconstruction.
$15 billion. Wow. Why did they pull out?
Well, it's reportedly attributed to a significant drop in investor interest. And that drop is apparently due to a shift in U.S. political climate, specifically under a renewed Trump presidency.
Oh, okay.
President Trump has repeatedly pressured European NATO allies to take more responsibility for Ukraine's support and, as you know, recently halted U.S. weapons shipments to Kyiv. So this BlackRock decision, it's really quite significant. It signals a potential major challenge for Ukraine's long-term funding needs for reconstruction, especially with the shifting political winds in the U.S. potentially redirecting aid or investment.
Yeah, that's a huge blow to Ukraine's long-term recovery plans. Just enormous. Now, let's briefly pivot just quickly to another potential flashpoint of global power dynamics.
Okay.
Taiwan.
Okay.
Taiwan, the island nation off the coast of East Asia, has officially formed a new military unit. And it's equipped with U.S.-supplied HIMARS. That's the high-mobility artillery rocket system, those multiple rocket launchers.
Right, the ones we've heard so much about in Ukraine.
Exactly. This marks the first such unit established on the island, and apparently 11 of the 29 HIMARS systems they purchased have already been delivered. And these systems, they're capable of firing GMLRS missiles, which have a range of up to 80 kilometers, and also the longer-range ATACMS missiles, with a range up to 300 kilometers.
And this move, of course, comes amid increasing tensions with China, which views Taiwan as part of its territory and has consistently condemned U.S. arms sales to the island. These HIMARS systems, with those 80 to 300-kilometer missile ranges, they aren't just powerful. They provide Taiwan with really critical asymmetric defense capabilities.
What does that mean exactly, asymmetric?
Well, it means they allow Taiwan, which is much smaller militarily than China, to potentially target invasion forces well before they reach the island. They could even potentially strike military staging areas or logistical hubs on the mainland. It levels the playing field somewhat. Former U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz indicated that Washington intends to speed up these arms deliverables to Taiwan, precisely to provide this kind of deterrence against potential aggression from Beijing. China, for its part, has labeled these arms deals as destabilizing and provocative. And they've responded with frequent large-scale military exercises near Taiwan. It really highlights the delicate balance of power, doesn't it? And the strategic posturing in the Indo-Pacific region, emphasizing defense capabilities that could, well, complicate any potential invasion scenario.
Absolutely. A very tense situation there. Okay, from these intricate global power plays, let's transition now to the equally complex and often, frankly, heart-wrenching situation in the Middle East. We're seeing ceasefire hopes, talks of sanctions, and these, well, unequal alliances constantly in flux. Okay, so in the Middle East, there's maybe a cautious sense of optimism emerging around a potential ceasefire in Gaza anyway. Hamas has apparently submitted what's being called a positive response to a U.S.-backed Gaza ceasefire proposal.
Indicating a willingness to engage in talks, at least.
Right? Engage in talks and negotiate over its implementation. The U.S. president expects to know soon whether Hamas has actually agreed to a 60-day truce. So, I mean, this signifies a potential breakthrough after all the intense conflict, maybe a glimmer of hope for the region.
It's definitely a glimmer. However, this hopeful development is kind of overshadowed by wider implications and, well, ongoing concerns. Recent reports by the United Nations Rapporteur, for example, cited over 60 global companies that are allegedly benefiting from the conflict in Gaza.
Benefiting how?
Well, the reports link these firms to profiting from the ongoing violence and oppression, raising really serious ethical concerns about corporate complicity in human rights violations, essentially monetizing a humanitarian crisis.
Wow. That's quite an accusation.
It is. And beyond that, the humanitarian impact remains absolutely dire. U.S. aid workers have been injured in Gaza, which just highlights the risks faced by anyone trying to help there. And in the West Bank, that's the landlocked territory in Western Asia, near the Mediterranean coast, dozens of Palestinian Bedouin families have been forced to flee their homes. This is due to escalating violence from Israeli settlers. They're facing threats and attacks that have created, well, a humanitarian crisis right there. This exodus just underscores the ongoing displacement and the precarity of life for so many people in the region.
It's just relentless. And this brings us to the international pressure, the relationships that are constantly shifting. Over 40 civil society organizations and prominent individuals across the Caribbean, specifically from CARICOM, the Caribbean community, they've urged their leaders to take strong actions against Israel.
What kind of actions?
Their demands include sanctions, a military embargo, suspension of diplomatic relations, and basically alignment with international legal standards.
Oh.
This call comes just ahead of the CARICOM heads of government meeting in Jamaica, the island nation there in the Caribbean. And the letter, it accuses CARICOM states of complicity with what they call Israel's occupation, apartheid regime, and military aggression. And they reference their own shared anti-colonial struggles, advocating for a stronger stance from a region that has historically stood against systems like that.
That's powerful framing, connecting it to their own history.
It is, though Antigua and Barbuda, another island nation in the Caribbean, did prohibit its flagged vessels from transporting military goods to conflict zones. But concerns remain because a vessel under its flag apparently recently delivered explosives to Israel, highlighting just how challenging enforcement can be.
It's always complex. And what's fascinating here is that the European Union is also preparing a formal list of potential sanctions against Israel. This is in response to alleged human rights violations during its military operations in Gaza.
The EU, too. What are they considering?
While options reportedly include suspending the EU-Israel Association Agreement, imposing an arms embargo, trade restrictions, halting scientific cooperation, and even sanctioning specific Israeli government officials, soldiers, and extremist settlers.
That's a wide range.
It is. However, imposing such sanctions would require unanimous approval from all 27 EU member states. And that's a challenging prospect, to say the least, because of staunch opposition from countries like Hungary.
Unanimity. Always the hurdle.
Exactly. This internal EU debate really reflects the complex legal and political considerations at play, where, human rights concerns clash directly with geopolitical alliances and deep-seated economic interests.
Meanwhile, the U.S.-Israel relationship itself, it's often described by sources like Al Jazeera as unequal, with Israel perceived to have, well, a dominant position and more influence in that dynamic.
That perception definitely shapes things.
Yeah, it colors much of the diplomatic landscape, shapes how aid and diplomatic pressure are applied or not applied. And adding to the regional complexity, former President Trump recently stated that Iran has not agreed to inspections or given up uranium enrichment, just highlighting the ongoing tensions over its nuclear program.
Right, raising concerns again about compliance.
Exactly. Concerns about Iran's compliance with nuclear regulations, and it just complicates the path to de-escalation in the wider Middle East. Though, interestingly, French President Macron's recent call with Putin also touched on nuclear nonproliferation amid these Middle East tensions. Apparently, both leaders agreed on Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy within the NPT framework.
Acknowledging the right while still concerned about the actions.
Precisely. And then there's the direct military action and maybe even concealment of information within the region. Israeli drone attacks in southern Lebanon, that's the country in the Middle East, bordering Israel, they killed one person, they injured several others, further escalating tensions there.
But here's where it gets particularly interesting, maybe even startling. A report by The Telegraph suggests that recent Iranian missile strikes successfully hit several key Israeli military installations.
Iranian missiles hit Israeli targets. When was this?
During that 12-day conflict that began back on June 13th, initiated by Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The report claims Iran had an airbase, a logistics hub, and an intelligence center inside Israel.
Okay.
But the stunning part, this information was reportedly concealed by Israeli authorities under military censorship.
Concealed. How do we know then?
Well, data from Oregon State University here in the United States using satellite radar technology apparently revealed that 6 Iranian missiles actually impacted 5 strategic sites across northern, southern, and central Israel.
Wow. Okay, that is a truly stunning detail. The idea that significant military impacts might have been kept out of public view. I mean, what are the implications when information, even about direct military strikes like that, is subject to such rigorous censorship?
Well, it raises a really important question, doesn't it, about how narratives are constructed and controlled in conflict zones. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights these complex, often contradictory relationships between, say, international law, geopolitical interests, and humanitarian concerns. And crucially, how the public understanding of a conflict can be actively shaped or maybe limited by those in power.
Yeah.
Such censorship can affect everything from public support for a war to international intervention decisions, even the historical record itself. It can create a really distorted view of events on the ground.
A curated reality, almost. Okay, from these macro-level geopolitical shifts and hidden strikes, let's transition now to the domestic challenges faced by individual nations, particularly concerning policy, public safety, and human rights. All right, let's turn our attention now to the United States political landscape, specifically President Trump's recent legislative moves and some surrounding controversies. President Donald Trump has officially signed what he's dubbed his Big Beautiful Bill, a pretty significant tax and spending bill, into law. He did this during a July 4th Independence Day event at the White House.
And this bill, it's nearly 900 pages long, and it apparently narrowly passed the House of Representatives after some pretty tense negotiations among Republicans.
Right, he wasn't smooth sailing.
Not at all. And what's fascinating here, I think, is the dual nature of this bill and its really far-reaching economic implications. It notably extends those 2017 Trump-era tax cuts, and it includes some temporary tax breaks on tips and overtime pay, which, could offer some immediate relief for certain workers.
Okay, so tax cut.
Yes, but, and this is a big but, to partially offset the costs, it also includes major cuts to Medicaid and food assistance programs like SNAP, that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program.
Major cuts. How major?
Well, the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they project that these rollbacks will result in 12 million people losing Medicaid coverage by 2034 and 3 million people losing SNAP eligibility by the same year.
12 million. 3 million. Those are huge numbers.
They are staggering. Furthermore, the bill is projected to increase the national debt by a whopping $3.3 trillion over the next decade.
Trillion with a T.
Trillion with a T. So state governments across the U.S. are now bracing for these added financial burdens as Washington essentially shifts much of the responsibility for healthcare and food assistance programs onto them. This could potentially lead to cuts at the state level or increase state taxes to cover the gap.
Wow, that's a really big shift in the social safety net, with massive implications for millions of Americans and, like you said, state budgets. And beyond the legislation itself, it seems President Trump is certainly keeping the news cycle vibrant.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah, not just with policy, but with some rather bold claims, too. He denied knowingly using an anti-Semitic term at a recent rally, claimed he had, quote, never heard the term used in that manner. That sparked a lot of criticism and debate, as you can imagine. He also made what's being called a false claim about wind turbines in China, complaining about Chinese components in turbines and wrongly suggesting China doesn't utilize wind power itself. which apparently sparked an immediate fact check on social media.
Right, China's actually a world leader in wind power.
Exactly. And he also ordered entry fee changes at national parks, proposing higher fees specifically for non-U.S. residents.
This really raises an important question, doesn't it? About the long-term societal impact versus perhaps short-term political gains, especially when such significant changes to social programs are enacted alongside these other directives and controversies. The Social Security tax situation also added to the confusion recently.
Oh yeah, what was that about?
Well, a recent letter regarding taxes sent what many called a confusing message to recipients. Some experts said it could mislead Social Security recipients about the new policy, despite the fact that apparently most seniors might actually get a tax break under it.
So the communication was just unclear.
Exactly. The clarification email later said that while taxes on Social Security aren't eliminated entirely, the new policy is structured so most seniors won't wind up paying it. But that nuance seems to have been missed in the initial communication, causing unnecessary worry for some.
Got it. Okay, so from the U.S. domestic policy scene, let's hop across the Atlantic now to the U.K., where similar issues of governance and public dissatisfaction seem to be playing out as well.
Okay, so in the UK, a court has rejected multiple bids to stop the government's terrorism ban on the activist group Palestine Action. So they're firmly maintaining its classification as a terrorist organization.
Right, that classification stands.
And following this decision, more than 20 supporters of the now officially banned group were arrested in London, that's the capital of the UK, of course, during a protest they held in solidarity. The Metropolitan Police confirmed these arrests were under suspicion of terror offenses, which really highlights the ongoing tensions surrounding the group and its activities, doesn't it? And raises questions about that balance between protest rights and national security.
Absolutely. And this legal development, it kind of intersects with broader security concerns, particularly those revealed by a recent investigation by the Telegraph newspaper.
What did they find? Well, this report highlighted significant security vulnerabilities at Royal Air Force, or RAF, bases across the UK, including key military sites housing those advanced F-35 nuclear-capable fighter jets.
Vulnerabilities at bases with F-35s, that sounds serious.
Extremely serious. The investigation found that security is often, quote, inadequately protected, relying on things like minimal fencing, sparse security cameras, and infrequent patrols. This issue really gained prominence after Palestine Action members reportedly breached RAF Bryce Norton and even vandalized 2 military aircraft last year.
Wow.
So the British government is now considering officially designating the group as a terrorist organization, as we just discussed, and also conducting a comprehensive security review of all its sensitive sites. Especially, and this is concerningly, since some of these vulnerabilities are apparently even visible on publicly accessible platforms like Google Street View.
You can see them on Street View.
Apparently so. Which raises a really important question. How can such critical defense infrastructure be so seemingly vulnerable? And what are the implications for national security, especially in what feels like a heightened global threat landscape?
Yeah, that's quite a glaring security lapse, and certainly concerning for national defense. These revelations also come at a time when the UK government is aiming to boost defense spending significantly, right? Up to 4.1% of GDP in the next 2 years.
That's the goal, nearly doubling the 2024 allocation of 2.3%.
And this is part of that broader NATO rearmament initiative, citing a perceived threat from Russia, a claim, of course, that Moscow continues to refute, criticizing this prioritization of militarization over, say, socioeconomic welfare.
Right. And speaking of welfare and justice, the UK House of Lords, that's the upper house of the UK Parliament, is urging the government to end those controversial no-hope indefinite jail terms. They're known as imprisonment for public protection, or IPP sentences.
What's the issue with those?
Well, the Lords stated quite plainly that they are not right and not fair. They reflect significant concerns within the justice system about fundamental fairness and proportionality. These sentences can leave individuals in prison indefinitely, even long after their minimum term or tariff has expired, simply if they are deemed to still pose a risk. It's created a population of prisoners with little hope of release.
I can see why that's controversial.
Definitely. And furthermore, shifting gears slightly, Lisa Nandy, a Labour MP, has publicly questioned why nobody has been fired at the BBC, the UK's public broadcaster, over a specific film they produced about the Gaza conflict. This raises concerns about accountability within a major public institution.
Right, demanding accountability.
It really highlights the pressure on public entities like the BBC to maintain impartiality and transparency, especially when dealing with sensitive international issues. And it shows the public demand for consequences when those standards are perceived, rightly or wrongly, to have been unmet.
Okay, so from the specific challenges within the UK, let's broaden our lens again now and look at human rights challenges, protests, social upheaval across different nations. It really reminds us that these issues are truly global.
Yeah, we really are seeing what feels like a powerful surge of citizen action globally, whether it's, demanding accountability from law enforcement or challenging political establishments. Protests in Kenya, that's the East African country, for instance, have reignited against police brutality, reflecting these persistent grievances the public has about police misconduct and the excessive use of force there.
And these demonstrations really highlight the urgent need for reforms in law enforcement practices and accountability. The big question, as always, is whether these demonstrations will finally lead to meaningful, lasting change this time.
Right. Elsewhere in Turkey, the country spanning Western Asia and Southeast Europe, the LGBTQ+ community is facing, significant challenges and discrimination. But reports say they continue to insist on their right to live authentically, striving for recognition, representation, and equal rights, despite all the societal pressures. Which shows remarkable resilience, doesn't it, in what's often a very restrictive environment. It's a quiet but powerful form of protest in itself.
Absolutely. However, contrasting that resilience, Turkey has also arrested 3 mayors in southern Turkey. This is seen as part of a broader crackdown on the political opposition there. Many view it as part of President Erdogan's ongoing efforts to suppress dissent and consolidate power.
Which naturally raises important questions about democratic principles and freedom of expression within the country. It's a worrying trend for many observers.
Meanwhile, in Mexico City, the capital of Mexico, demonstrators have protested against the rising cost of living and also gentrification. But interestingly, they were also highlighting issues related to U.S. migration, pointing to the interconnectedness of local economic struggles with international border policies.
Seeing those links explicitly drawn.
Yeah. And in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, that's the country in the South Caucasus region of Eurasia, thousands of Armenian citizens marched. They were demanding the release of Samvel Karapetyan, who is a prominent Russian-Armenian energy tycoon and philanthropist. He was arrested on charges of advocating for a coup.
Wow, advocating for a coup.
That's the charge. And the protesters, including members of the Armenian Apostolic Church, criticized Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's government, particularly for its decision to cede border villages to Azerbaijan. The government has also reportedly arrested some Armenian Apostolic Church clerics and moved to nationalize Karapetyan's energy company, which, as you can imagine, only intensifies the political and religious tensions within Armenia.
That whole situation underscores these rising tensions over national sovereignty, religious freedom, and political dissent within Armenia itself. It reflects a populace that seems increasingly concerned about its national identity and territorial integrity, especially after the recent conflicts with Azerbaijan.
Absolutely. Now, in a completely different vein, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi received a top civilian honor in Trinidad and Tobago, the island nation in the Caribbean. This adds to his previous recognition in Ghana, the country in West Africa. It seems to further cement Modi's international recognition and diplomatic outreach efforts.
Building those global connections.
And speaking of political shifts and diverse backgrounds, this is quite a story. Zoran Kwame Mamdani, who is a Muslim immigrant born in Uganda, in East Africa, but with Indian heritage, he secured an unofficial win in the Democratic primary for New York City mayor, right here in the United States.
Really? That's significant.
Hugely significant.
Yeah.
His victory challenges the sort of Democratic establishment and really energizes progressive movements. He has pledges for things like free public buses, public childcare, city-owned grocery stores, even rent freezes.
Ambitious platform.
Very. If elected, he would be only the second immigrant mayor in New York City history since, wait for it, 1684.
Wow. Since 1684.
Yeah. And his win has also reportedly sparked the ire of Modi's supporters, the Hindu right in India and abroad, due to his faith and his outspoken views, which just highlights the global reach of political ideologies and identities these days.
It really does, from local NYC politics right back to India.
It's a truly global picture, isn't it? Citizens pushing back, demanding accountability, fundamental rights, from Nairobi to Yerevan, and even shaping the political landscape in major global cities like New York. This brings us, quite naturally, to a major global issue affecting human rights and policy everywhere: migration and border control.
And French police have begun a new and frankly quite controversial tactic to try and curb illegal crossings over the English Channel, that's the strait separating southern England from northern France.
What are they doing?
They're reportedly slashing inflatable dinghies used by migrants before they can even set out for the UK. The BBC actually obtained footage showing officers puncturing a boat that had people in it.
While people were in it.
Apparently so. This marks a really significant shift in enforcement tactics as France updates its maritime laws to allow police intervention in these shallow coastal waters, not just, on land or during rescue operations later on.
That is a dramatic escalation, and this comes amid what reports call a significant rise in channel crossings, right?
Yeah.
Nearly 20,000 asylum seekers arrived via small boats in just the first half of 2025.
19,982, yeah. That's a 50% increase from last year and up 75% from 2023. It's a complex issue, as you said, often rooted in conflicts, economic hardship, instability. Factors sometimes worsened by past Western interventions, highlighting the powerful push factors driving these often desperate journeys.
It really does.
And it raises that important question again. How do nations balance genuine humanitarian concerns with their perceived security threats and internal political pressures? Especially when migration flows are clearly on the rise globally, we see this tension playing out elsewhere too.
Like where?
Well, violent clashes erupted between police and anti-migrant protesters outside an asylum center in Alcalá de Henares, that's a suburb of Madrid, in Spain. This happened after a Malian asylum seeker was arrested for the alleged rape of a young Spanish woman.
Well, that sounds volatile.
Extremely. Far-right groups apparently joined the protest, which escalated into confrontations with police. Protesters criticized Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's pro-immigration policies, and the mayor of Alcalá de Henares announced plans to formally request the center's closure, citing overcrowding and insecurity.
So local politics getting very heated over national policy.
Exactly. And in the United States, migrants currently in U.S. detention have lost their appeal against deportation back to South Sudan, that's the East Central African country. This came after a legal battle where a judge briefly blocked the deportation, but eventually cleared the legal path for it to proceed. The varying responses across these different countries, France, Spain, the U.S., they highlight vastly different approaches to what is fundamentally a shared and increasingly pressing global challenge.
Absolutely. From the complexities of human society and migration, let's now turn to the raw power of nature and our environment. Okay, let's shift focus now. And the images and stories coming out of Texas are just truly heartbreaking, a stark reminder of nature's formidable and often unpredictable power. Central Texas in the United States has been hit by what authorities are calling catastrophic and terrible flash floods, described as an extraordinary catastrophe.
The death toll is significant already.
Yeah, at least 24 people have died. And tragically, between 20 to 25 children, mostly girls, are still missing from a Christian summer camp. It's called Camp Mystic, apparently a century-old camp located near the Guadalupe River in the small town of Hunt in Kerr County, Texas. Reports say months' worth of heavy rain fell in just a few hours.
Just devastating speed and volume. The situation really underscores the increasing frequency, it seems, and intensity of these extreme weather events, and the critical need for better advanced warning systems and rapid response protocols, especially in vulnerable areas like those in floodplains. The Guadalupe River, there in the Texas Hill Country, that's a geographic region of central Texas, it overflowed so rapidly. Reports say there was simply no time for evacuation. Emergency crews have already rescued or evacuated 237 people, including 167 by helicopter, which is just incredible work under those conditions.
Amazing rescue efforts.
But while the area is known for flash floods, it's apparently one of the most dangerous river valleys in the U.S. for them. Officials stated this particular event was unexpectedly severe, which highlights the challenge, doesn't it, of predicting and preparing for these climate extremes that seem to be breaking previous records.
And that danger isn't even over yet. More rain is predicted, with the flood threat extending from San Antonio all the way north to Waco, two major cities in Texas. Families are just desperately pleading for information on those missing girls. President Trump described the deaths as shocking and pledged federal support. Melania Trump also expressed condolences. Our hearts they truly go out to everyone impacted by this devastating natural disaster.
Absolutely, just unimaginable. Now, from this immediate tragic environmental disaster, let's look at some other pressing environmental and climate challenges around the globe. Turkey, for instance, has arrested 10 suspects in connection with recent devastating wildfires that have affected the country.
arrested suspects. So arson is suspected.
It seems so. The number of arrests suggests potential foul play in at least some of these fires, adding that layer of human-induced complication to what are often natural or climate-exacerbated disasters. Tragically, a forestry worker injured in a wildfire in the western Turkish province of Izmir has died, raising the death toll from these fires to 3. While blazes in villages near Izmir were brought under control, emergency crews are still battling fires in a province bordering Syria, that's the country in Western Asia, in the Middle East.
It's just relentless, fires and floods.
It feels that way sometimes. Now, looking at another critical environmental issue, a slower burn crisis perhaps. Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, the landlocked country in Central and South Asia, is facing what's being called an existential threat.
Existential. How so?
Water. If current trends continue, its aquifers, the underground water sources, will become dry by 2030. That's only 5 years away.
Dry by 2030.
Dry by 2030, potentially displacing some 3 million Afghan residents. This highlights a critical global water crisis, fueled by climate change and unsustainable water management. It threatens the very habitability of major urban centers.
3 million people potentially displaced by lack of water. That's staggering.
It really is. But what's fascinating here amidst all this doom and gloom is the stark contrast. On one hand, you have the immediate devastation and these long-term threats posed by climate events and environmental degradation. But on the other hand, you have these quiet, almost unseen mechanisms of nature that are actually, well, helping us.
Helping us? How?
Well, scientists have recently discovered how tiny deep-sea creatures are effectively storing carbon and helping fight global warming.
Tiny creatures. Doing what?
Well, their migration process, basically involving feeding near the surface and then migrating deeper, gaining weight, it plays a crucial role in sequestering carbon, pulling it down into the deep ocean. It provides a surprising insight into these intricate natural carbon capture mechanisms that we're only just beginning to understand.
Wow. So nature has its own little carbon capture systems running.
Exactly. It reminds us how much we still have to learn about our planet's incredibly complex ecosystems and the vital role they play in climate regulation.
It's incredible how much we still don't know. Okay, from the environment, let's pivot now to the intricate systems of human health and the intersection of technology and our well-being. All right, let's talk health. From groundbreaking innovations to some pretty concerning trends. On the innovation front, this is interesting. A San Diego startup called Gallant has announced $18 million in funding.
Okay.
They plan to bring the first FDA-approved, ready-to-use stem cell therapy for pets to the market.
Stem cells for pets.
Yeah. It aims to revolutionize pet healthcare by providing treatments for various conditions, arthritis, kidney disease, things like that, without needing invasive procedures. Who knew our furry friends would be getting such advanced medical care so soon?
It's truly a leap in veterinary medicine, isn't it? Extending personalized and regenerative medicine to companion animals. Very cool. However, on the more concerning side of health news, measles cases in the U.S. have surged to a record high. This is since the disease was officially declared eliminated back in 2000.
Record high. How many cases?
There have been at least 12,277 confirmed cases reported just in 2025 so far. That surpasses the previous record from 2019.
Wow. Why the surge?
Well, it highlights a really troubling rise in measles infections, often linked to declining vaccination rates in certain communities. It's a stark reminder of the importance of maintaining robust public health measures because diseases we thought were gone can rapidly reemerge.
Yeah, complacency is dangerous there.
Absolutely. Also, a personal account from a 16-year-old named Abby highlights the dual nature of substance use. She apparently found initial solace using ketamine to escape negative thoughts, but she says it nearly took her life. It just underscores the severe risks of self-medication, especially with powerful substances, and the critical importance of professional mental health support for young people facing emotional struggles.
That's a scary story.
Yeah.
And there are always new medical mysteries emerging too, aren't there? I saw a medical mystery article discussing something called post-infectious inflammatory response syndrome, or PIRS.
PIRS, right. It's an autoimmune reaction that happens in some previously healthy patients after a fungal infection is killed off by treatment. Apparently, it's not unlike the inflammatory response that has produced long COVID in some people.
Huh. So our immune system overreacting after an infection.
Essentially, yeah. Suggesting a broader pattern maybe of these post-viral or post-infection inflammatory conditions that we still don't fully understand. And in a really profound guest column I read, an individual reflects on their personal dilemma. potentially having an incurable inherited disease like Huntington's, which her father died from.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she has a 50% chance of inheriting the gene, but she's choosing not to undergo testing for it. It just highlights the incredibly complex emotional, ethical, and personal considerations individuals face when dealing with that kind of deeply personal health information, where, knowledge itself can feel like a heavy burden.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where knowing might change everything, but not necessarily for the better in terms of quality of life.
Precisely. Now, what's particularly fascinating and maybe concerning, here is the intersection of our mental health with emerging technology. There's an article exploring this emerging concern of ChatGPT psychosis.
ChatGPT psychosis, what does that mean?
Well, it's where users who rely very heavily on large language model platforms like ChatGPT reportedly start experiencing symptoms such as delusions, paranoia, and social disconnection. There are even anecdotal reports suggesting troubling cases that have resulted in job loss, family estrangement, and even homelessness.
Seriously, because of interacting with AI. So what does this tell us? I mean, beyond the immediate concerns for those individuals, what does this ChatGPT psychosis phenomenon suggest about our broader psychological vulnerabilities, especially as we rely more and more on AI for, connection and information?
It's a great question. It really highlights a critical, often overlooked vulnerability. As AI becomes more conversational, more, emotionally resonant, it doesn't just process information anymore. It seems to actively participate in the construction of subjective reality, especially for users who might already be vulnerable. Well, LLMs are inherently designed to be responsive, conversational. That's their strength. But that means they can inadvertently reinforce a user's pre-existing delusional beliefs. Someone psychologically vulnerable might misinterpret AI responses as, say, divine messages, confirmation of conspiracies, or signs of some unique personal significance meant just for them.
Okay, I can see that potential.
And furthermore, there are design flaws, things like AI hallucinations, where the model just generates false information but states it confidently. There's overconfidence in its own output, and even the use of these emotional voice modes now. All of that can further blur the lines between simulation and reality, making it really difficult for some users to distinguish between the AI's generated text and objective truth. Social isolation is also a major factor here. Studies indicate that intensive LLM users often report loneliness and reduced real-world social interaction. This creates a kind of feedback loop where the AI becomes the primary and often deeply unreliable source of connection and information. So the article really questions, is AI the root cause of this psychosis? Or is it more like a mirror, reflecting deeper societal and psychological fractures that AI interaction merely exacerbates?
That is a lot to process, really makes you think about our relationship with this technology.
It certainly does.
Okay, on a perhaps somewhat lighter note related to emotions, but in a different context. The debate over crying at work. It's apparently been reignited after Chancellor Rachel Reeves in the UK cried in Parliament this week.
Yes, I saw that mentioned.
And experts and executive coaches are suggesting now that crying at work may be seen as a strength rather than a weakness, challenging those old-fashioned perceptions of, stoic emotional restraint and maybe showcasing vulnerability as a positive attribute. So maybe it's okay to shed a tear at the office after all. Reflecting a shift towards more authentic workplaces, perhaps.
A potential shift, yeah. Interesting cultural moment.
Okay. From the profound and often challenging aspects of global news and health, let's transition now to the lighter, yet still often insightful, realm of sports, culture, and some surprising events. All right, what a mix of highs and lows in the world of sports. First up, let's talk competitive eating. Joey Chestnut. He secured his 17th victory at Nathan's hot dog eating contest. That's the one held every year in Coney Island, New York, here in the U.S.
17th. Incredible.
Isn't it? He devoured an astonishing 70.5 hot dogs and buns in just 10 minutes, reclaiming his title after missing last year's contest. The man is he's a legend. Truly a master of his very specific craft.
He certainly commands that stage. Now, over on the tennis courts of Wimbledon in London, UK, British number 1 Emma Raducanu faced a really tough test. She fell, as the reports say, agonizingly short against the top seed, Aryna Sabalenka from Belarus, losing in the third round.
Tough loss for her.
Yeah. But then Raducanu later publicly criticized Wimbledon's disappointing use of electronic line calling it so wrong, which sparked a bit of a debate about the reliability of technology in these high-stakes sports moments.
Oh, interesting. The Hawkeye controversy again.
Exactly. It highlights that fascinating tension, doesn't it, between human judgment and technological precision, even in the most established traditions of sport like Wimbledon.
Yeah, absolutely. What a mix of highs and lows indeed. From hot dog heroics to controversies over technology. It truly captures the spectrum of human emotion and endeavor in sports. However, the world of sports also saw profound tragedy this week. Liverpool Football Club star Diogo Jota and his brother Andre Silva tragically passed away in a car crash in Spain.
Oh, that's terrible news. Awful.
It's just awful. Crowds gathered to mourn their loss in Jota's Portuguese hometown of Gondomar. That's in northern Portugal, and also in Liverpool, UK. The entire Liverpool team apparently joined family and friends for the funeral in Portugal. Just a truly heartbreaking loss for the football community worldwide, reminding us that even these global icons are deeply rooted in their families and communities.
Such sad news.
Okay, moving from the competitive fields now to the broader canvas of culture, entertainment, and some of the, well, quirky stories that capture our attention. All right, first up in entertainment news, a big music comeback. The iconic British rock band Oasis. They kicked off their reunion tour in Cardiff, Wales, in the UK. This is after a 16-year hiatus.
16 years. That's a long wait for
A
fans.
very long wait. Apparently, they delivered a stellar performance to 70,000 fans, proving they've still got it. It just demonstrates the enduring power of music, doesn't it? To draw massive crowds like that, even after so long.
Absolutely. And speaking of music, this July 4th saw a really vibrant wave of new releases from Caribbean artists, including the international dancehall icon Sean Paul. He released his summer anthem, Ginger. And reggae stalwarts Zamunda and Fantan Mojah collaborated on a track called Roots Rock Reggae, recorded at the legendary Tough Gong Studios in Kingston, Jamaica, the capital of Jamaica.
Tough Gong, wow.
Yeah. And emerging singer Riel also stepped into the spotlight with a remix featuring the seasoned dancehall star Busy Signal. It really showcases the dynamic and evolving landscape of Caribbean music right now.
Sounds like a good time to update the playlist.
Yeah.
Now, Pride in London in the UK also made its return, showcasing resilience, apparently, despite organizers facing challenges from reduced sponsorship funding and volunteer availability, which actually caused some event cancellations.
That's tough.
Yeah, but it highlights the ongoing importance of these cultural events, right? For community building, for advocacy, even when they're faced with financial and logistical hurdles like that. And in culinary news, a significant shift in Parisian fine dining. Shintaro Awa, who is a Japanese chef, has been appointed to head the kitchen of L'Ambroisie in Paris, France.
L'Ambroisie, the 3 Michelin star place.
That's the one. He's replacing the legendary Bernard Picot, who helmed that restaurant for nearly 45 years. It really marks a generational and maybe cultural shift at one of the world's most revered restaurants.
Indeed, a real changing of the guard in the culinary world. Now, shifting to education news, a study found that smartphone bans in Dutch schools, that's in the Netherlands, the country in Northwest Europe, actually improved student focus.
Oh, really? They have data on that?
Yeah. 3/4 of the surveyed high schools reported positive effects on students' concentration and enhanced learning outcomes. It provides pretty compelling evidence, I think, for policies aimed at reducing digital distractions in educational environments.
Makes sense. A clear win for focused learning, maybe. Now, for some unsettling crime news, but with broader societal implications, perhaps. Austin, Texas, here in the United States, is apparently gripped by serial killer fears.
Oh, why is that?
Because dozens of bodies, predominantly male victims, continue to be pulled from Lady Bird Lake there. It's raising serious questions about public safety and the nature of these unexplained deaths within the community. Just a deeply concerning situation.
That sounds very disturbing.
Yeah. We also saw reports that fraudsters used fake wills to steal millions from deceased individuals, exploiting grieving families and legal loopholes to basically siphon off inheritances, which highlights a disturbing vulnerability in estate management and legal systems where the deceased and their families can be victimized long after they're gone.
Wow, that's predatory. And this whole section really demonstrates that fascinating intersection of human ambition, whether it's in sports or business, with the profound impacts of both natural events and, well, deliberate human choices, good and bad. Consider the outrage sparked by that video of a new record-breaking private jet powered by Rolls-Royce engines.
Oh, yeah, I saw something about that.
It was widely labeled online as more toys for rich toddlers, fueling intense debate about wealth disparity and extravagant spending, especially in a world grappling with economic challenges and serious climate concerns. The optics are just difficult for many people.
Yeah, definitely struck a nerve.
Hmm.
And finally, a truly heartbreaking economic story coming out of Kashmir. That's the region in northern India. The tourism industry there has been absolutely devastated.
Why? What happened?
Following a deadly terrorist attack back on April 22nd, 26 people were killed, and 25 of them were tourists, in a place called Pahalgam. This triggered a 4-day military escalation between India and Pakistan, and it just crushed what had been a burgeoning tourism revival in the region.
Oh, that's awful timing for the local economy.
Terrible. Hotel occupancy reportedly plummeted to just 10%, threatening financial ruin for countless businesses that rely completely on visitor income. Now, infrastructure investment, like the new Chenab Railway Bridge and the Vande Bharat Express train service, could aid long-term recovery. But realistically, restored security and rebuilding trust from travelers are absolutely crucial first steps.
Absolutely. These stories of tragedy, recovery, and societal debate, they just remind us constantly of the interplay between these huge global forces and individual lives, underscoring how deeply interconnected these seemingly disparate events truly are, from the micro-level impact on local economies like in Kashmir, right up to the macro-level political tensions and even personal choices about wealth. It's all part of the same global tapestry, isn't it?
And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another, whirlwind deep dive into the global events of this July 5th, 2025. We have covered so much ground, from those geopolitical struggles for dominance way up in the Arctic and the ever-evolving tragic conflict in Ukraine and Russia, right down to the very human element of climate disasters in Texas, the ongoing debates over social freedoms and migration, and those intriguing, sometimes worrying intersections of technology and our human well-being.
Our goal, as always, was hopefully to provide some of those aha moments, helping you see how everything is interconnected, how decisions made in one corner of the world can ripple across continents, affecting economies, societies, and ultimately individual lives. What stands out to you from this deep dive today? Was it the growing global competition for critical resources, the sheer resilience of communities facing adversity, whether from floods or conflict, or maybe the unexpected ways science and even human emotion intersect with our daily lives and, increasingly, our understanding of reality itself?
As we wrap up, let's leave you with a final provocative thought to maybe chew on. Given the sheer speed and volume of information we've unpacked today, it's a lot, and the increasing reliance on AI for processing it, as we discussed with those concerns about ChatGPT psychosis, this raises, I think, an important question for all of us. In a world where even our information sources are evolving so rapidly and sometimes causing unforeseen psychological impacts, how critically must you engage with the news? How do you truly remain well-informed and avoid becoming overwhelmed by the daily deluge? Or maybe worse, having your perception of reality subtly reshaped without even realizing it.
It's a challenge we all face now. We definitely encourage you to continue your own deep dives into the topics that resonated most with you today. That kind of informed curiosity, that desire to dig a little deeper, is truly what drives understanding in our incredible complex world.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for joining us on The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep digging deeper.